Today, I want to tell you a story about global child health. And it's a story that really pulls you in two directions. On one hand, it's one of the greatest public health success stories in human history. But on the other, it's a story of an ongoing, absolutely heartbreaking tragedy. So let's get into it.
Okay, so first, the good news. And it is really good news. If you go back to 1990, a staggering 14.2 million children under the age of 15 died. Now, fast forward to 2018, and that number dropped to 6.2 million. That is a huge 56% reduction, an incredible achievement that means millions and millions of children's lives were saved.
But, and this is the part that's so tough, 6.2 million is obviously not zero. We're still talking about millions of kids dying every single year, and very often from things we absolutely know how to prevent. And here's where it gets even more focused. This tragedy is really concentrated in the very earliest years of a child's life. A truly shocking 85% of all those childhood deaths, that's 5.3 million kids, happen before they even get to their 5th birthday. So let's zoom in on where the biggest dangers really are. Okay, so first up, we need to look at what's called the neonatal period. That's just the first month of life. This is, and there's really no other way to put it, the single most dangerous time in a person's entire life. And this chart really shows you just how critical we're talking about. Almost half, a full 47% of all deaths in kids under 5 happen in just that first month. That's 2.5 million newborns who don't even make it past their first 4 weeks. So what's going on here? Why is it so deadly? Well, the reasons are tragically simple. You're looking at things like being born too early, complications during birth like not getting enough oxygen, and infections that their tiny, brand new immune systems just can't handle. And there's one factor that's sort of hiding behind all of this, and it's low birth weight. It's a factor in as many as 80% of all of these neonatal deaths. This often comes from things like the mother's nutrition, and it just creates this incredible vulnerability right from a baby's very first breath. Okay, so for a child who gets past that really critical first month, the dangers don't just vanish, they change. And that brings us to the next big set of hurdles, surviving those first 5 years. So it makes you wonder, right? If a baby makes it through that incredibly risky first month, what are the next big threats they're facing on the path to their 5th birthday? Well, it really comes down to two major and often connected forces. The first is infectious disease, and the second, the one that makes the first one so much more dangerous, is undernutrition. So when we talk about infections, there are what you could call the big three, the main culprits responsible for so many of these deaths. We're talking about pneumonia, which is a horrible lung infection, diarrheal diseases, which can cause deadly dehydration, and of course, malaria. Just stop and think about that for a second. These three conditions, which are largely preventable and treatable, are responsible for almost a third of all deaths for this whole age group. This isn't about some mysterious, incurable disease. It's about a lack of access to really basic care. And this is the other half of that deadly duo. It's kind of like the hidden enemy here. Undernutrition is a factor in more than a third of all deaths for kids under 5. It's like the silent partner in crime, weakening a child's immune system so that something common, like a bout of diarrhea, can become a death sentence. Malnutrition isn't just one thing. It shows up in a few different ways. The first is something called stunting. Think of this as long-term chronic malnutrition. It means a child is too short for their age, and it can permanently affect their brain development. We're talking about 155 million kids. Then there's wasting. If stunting is a slow burn, wasting is a raging fire. This is acute malnutrition, where a child is dangerously thin for their height. It's a sign that they've lost a lot of weight recently, and it puts 52 million children at immediate risk of dying. Okay, so what happens for the kids who do make it past those first 5 years? Well, the landscape of risk, it just keeps on changing. Let's take a look at the threats that older children and adolescents face. And you can see that shift so clearly here. I mean, look on the left. For the little ones under 5, it's all about those birth issues and infectious diseases we talked about. But then look to the right. For older kids, the leading causes of death become things like injuries, different types of cancer, and tragically, mental health disorders. And when we say injuries, what are we actually talking about? Well, we're mostly talking about accidents that are, for the most part, preventable. road traffic incidents are a huge killer around the world. But so are things like drowning, burns, poisoning, and falls, the kinds of dangers that can just be part of a child's everyday world. And then there's something we absolutely cannot overlook: the growing crisis in mental health. Around the world, somewhere between 10 and 20% of all children and adolescents are dealing with a mental health disorder. That's a huge number, and it's a burden that's so often invisible. And the consequences here, well, they're the most severe you can imagine. For young men in their teens, suicide has actually become one of the leading causes of death. It tells us that just surviving physically isn't the whole story. We have to be there for their mental well-being too. Okay, for this last part, I want us to zoom way, way out. Because none of these health issues happen in a bubble. They're all shaped by the world these kids are born into, by these huge, often unseen forces. You have to ask, what's really deciding whether a kid gets a vaccine, or clean water, or sees a doctor when they're sick? It all comes down to these big underlying drivers. Poverty and inequality are probably the biggest. But you also have conflict, which just destroys health systems, climate change, which drives hunger and disease, and the simple fact of not having access to a doctor or clinic. And what happens when you have those forces at play? You get this incredible, profound inequality. This problem is not spread out evenly across the globe. Over 80% of all child deaths are packed into just two regions, Sub-Saharan Africa and Central and South Asia. It means a child's chance at life is pretty much decided by the lottery of where they happen to be born. And that, really, leaves us with one final, very challenging thought. The solutions to most of these problems, we have them. We have the vaccines, the antibiotics, the nutritional supplements, the clean water technologies. The science is not the problem here. We have the knowledge. So the real question isn't how, it's will we. It's a question of priorities, of political will, and of basic fairness.